This next part, very fascinated to talk to you about this because this was emotionally a very interesting part for me. We get our introduction to another great character, Prax, who is I believe, a botanist on the Ganymede station on the, I get, he's on the Earther side, correct?
Uh,
Or is he on
yeah,
the Mars
I
side? I'm trying
believe
to
he's
remember
on the
exactly.
no, I think he's on the Earther side, but I think the way that they view like the scientists there, I think there's a lot of overlap. Like think about it, the International Space
Right.
Station where you have people from different countries working together. I think the importance of the food that Ganymede gives to the belt, because they had all those mirrors to grow the food. I think since that is so essential to the belt, sides there don't really matter as much, and that's kind of how he struck me, where he's like, I don't really
Yeah.
care, Earth versus Mars. We're just trying to like
Right.
feed people here.
But our first introduction to him is on Ganymede Station doing his job, and we get
Hmm.
to see the consequence of a giant mirror falling and destroying most of the Ganymede Station. And we introduced to his daughter, who we find out was lost in all of this, which again was a very interesting thing. And the scene that sticks out initially, and I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about, is when he's on the ship leaving Ganymede. He sees his friend there. They talk. They have this emotional point because he believes his daughter is dead at that point, and that's a very hard thing to deal with.
Hmm.
Trying to figure out his emotions, and we get this crazy scene, which again I did not expect this. And while it was happening, I was like, oh my goodness,
Because it's
he's gonna go,
slow. Yeah.
because it's so slow. Yeah, it just happens very slow and organically. But where he's about to get on the, I believe it was like going to be they told him it was a transport ship that was going to another one
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah.
that.
Exactly. Yep.
And they stop him right before, because I believe, and the reason I was asking about which side he was on, because I believe it was
Mm.
they were killing
No,
all the
you're right.
Mars. Was they killing all the Mars?
I think they were just killing the inners, and
Oh, you're right.
I
It was
think
the inners is
Prax
the word
was
they
actually
used,
born.
because he
I
was an
think
inner. He was born on Ganymede, I believe.
yeah, I think he was a belter. I think that's an important point to somebody
Yeah,
correct us down below, but I think that's an important point. I think he was an OPA, or not an OPA, a member of the belt. So I think that's
correct. Yeah.
why he lived and the others were inners.
Yeah, inner was, yeah, that is correct. That's the word they use, because again, they get on what they think is this transport ship, and he's having this moment with their like, see ya. And then you see
And
the
then out
door
they
open, and
go.
you're just like, wait a second. And then you see like the shock on her face. Beautifully acted scene on both
Hmm.
for her and him, but them
Hmm.
being projected out. And again, just another crazy moment where you're just like, this show keeps surprising me in terms of at least the things they're willing to go after. And probably I say that more so probably the books. I'm assuming that's something that happens in the books as well. But he's standing there in horror, and the guy's just like, Belter's gotta stick together, huh? And he's just like, you just murdered my friend.
Yeah,
And
but
like,
he doesn't do anything about it either. He just kind
right.
of
And
like,
what can he do? But again,
yeah.
I just brought that up because it is a crazy, crazy moment. And again, just another turning point of the
But
show
a
of like, all
great
right,
great introduction to the character, because we have the beginning of his character arc set right there. He's got trauma and he doesn't really act in the face of anything. He's just kind of this passive person who now lost his daughter, and that's a really interesting thing to see, because obviously anybody on ever is going to try to get their daughter back, if they believe that
absolutely.
they're alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, really really great way to have a character arc introduced.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that introduction as well. Just very, very powerful, and you certainly understand his plight. And I'm a young dad, so I was really like, I understand. Like, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
hope I never have to experience anything like that, but I can certainly be empathetic in terms of what he's trying to deal with. So as I was watching, I'm like, okay, well, he seems like he's going to be an important part of this story. He's probably going to meet up with the crew eventually, and he does. But a little side note I have is we do get to see that happen before he gets to we see before he gets to meet up with the crew, is we start to get to see the cracks in Gunny's allegiance to Mars as she
Mm-hmm.
is being interrogated, basically the same way we see the Mars uh, crew interrogate the Tycho crew
Those
with the,
tiny little
yep,
pills. Yep.
the little tic tac that
Little
heightens
vitamin D pills.
their Sherlock Holmes pill that makes them
Mm-hmm.
very aware. don't really know a better way to think of it. But it was
That's
just a
perfect.
fascinating scene because we get to see her. She's still very distraught, and like, my team died. I saw this guy who didn't have a suit on, and he attacked us, and he wasn't taking any damage from us from what we could see. And you learn very quickly that something very weird is going on, because everybody who's talking to her is kind of like denying what she's saying, doesn't believe, saying like, "Oh, well, you're just in shock, blah blah blah." And she's
Yeah.
very much like, they're gaslighting her, I guess is the word, in
Very
terms of like,
gaslighting. Yep. Yeah,
like
exactly.
you know, this is blah blah blah. You don't really know what happened. You're in shock. Like, don't talk about that. And that, yeah, certainly was a switch in my head of like, okay, something fishy is going on. Mars is obviously somewhat involved with what's going on, in the sense that they don't want this to get out, let alone have anybody
Mhm.
who is in her position being, spreading that around. So that was very, very, very interesting, in terms of, I didn't really know what to think about the proto molecule, in the sense of like who had their hands in it. But it
Yeah.
certainly tipped my, and I'm assuming their intention was to be like, something's fishy is going on with Mars, and we're going to show you this through Gunny's character. But what was your thought when we start seeing the gaslighting happening?
Um, it's a very typical thing for people not to believe a woman, of course, right? So
Yeah,
you have that element, and then
unfortunate. Yeah.
um, the audience had seen.
Yep.
So um, the audience is aware that she's telling the truth. So you feel her frustration of like, and the audience is in a similar situation where it's like, how do you explain what happened? Like we have some of the context of a character like that.
Right.
How would you explain what this thing is without, you know, people thinking you're crazy? And there's no real solution. You can't just say, no, there was like, seriously, there's this like monster man without a vac suit that attacked us and killed like trained Marines. So she can't say that, but she suspects pretty quickly that there is a cover up happening. And yeah, she's in a very, very hard situation.
So, question I have for you is, once we get Prax, so I'm shifting back to Prax here. Once he meets up with the crew, or they find him based off the records of like who was on the ship, or who was on Ganymede when this all happened, and who's alive, who's where, and they figure out he's on, I believe it's, is it Tycho where they're at? Yeah, I believe it's Tycho.
Yep, they bring the to
Um,
Tycho. Yep.
so they find him, and they figure out, what was going on, and he talks about, his daughter being missing, and where she was, and with this pediatrician and everything. And I have to admit that I, not instantly, but I had a pit in my stomach of, as soon as I heard pediatrician and the kid missing and taking with it, I was like,
Yep.
oh no, are we
Yep.
dealing with kids being used or experimented on? Like, I literally wrote down experimenting on kids, question mark. And again, I'm a young dad, so I
Hmm.
immediately was like, red in the eyes of like, okay, if that's the direction we're going and this is what's actually happening, like, I am going to be pissed, because that is a really rough thing to mentally think through and process, in terms of what that means. And we'll revisit
Hmm.
that later. But did you have, when those pieces are come together, in terms
Yeah.
of who this doctor was as a pediatrician, and what seems to be him taking the daughter with him out of the station, like, I think it was like an hour before the crash happened? Did you have any kind of like ickiness about that, or did you
Very
think that was
much.
anything else? Because I felt icky. I felt gross, because I was like, I
Yeah.
think this is what's happening, and if it's true, I'm very disturbed by it.
Yeah, very much. Especially since, these scientists are like preying on people with already having, I think it's like some sort of autoimmune deficiency that they had.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
already like kids who are sick, not just kids, but kids who are sick. Like
Yes.
that's yeah, I can't think of a worse villain, I really
That
can't.
that is a great point. Yeah. And again, just, I was like, not besides myself, but I was just kind of like really grossed. I was just like, it's a show, but it's just, oh, I just,
Yeah.
yeah, just even just thinking about it makes me uncomfortable, just trying to put myself in the shoes of that. So
Mhm.
uh, we,
Absolutely.
I just wanted to see if you had that feeling, because because I
Yeah.
wrote it down, remember being like, I hope that's not the direction we're going, just in the sense of having to kind of deal with our characters figuring that out and what that
Yeah.
implication was.
Well, and
But
then I was worried that, would they I'm trying to remember the first time I saw it if I was worried that the monster that we had seen might have been May, and I'm trying to figure
Yeah,
out the
right.
timeline. So I think I might have had that thought or a similar thought
Oh,
where I was
right.
worried maybe they're going to run into May when she's already a monster, like turned into a monster. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, I certainly had
I
those
was very
thoughts. So
worried about that. Yep,
yeah, so just wanted to see if you had the thought because I didn't know if it was something obvious, but I was like, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that because I feel really gross about it. But shifting back a little bit back to
absolutely.
Gunny because we do get some great scenes with her and I really love her story. So we where I'm kind of shifting it to is where we ultimately have the convening of Mars and Earth trying to figure out exactly what was happening. And they want Gunny to give her testimony of what happened. And as we were talking earlier, there's some gaslighting. They don't want her to say exactly what happened. They have this very cleaned up story. And then we get I don't know what he was. Was he like the person she talked to most? I'm trying to remember his name, but he wasn't like an officer, but he was like a
Well, they had like a like not a pastor, but like a oh, what is
right
that?
pastor. It was a religious
Like a military minister of some
chaplain.
sort. Chaplain, thank you. Yep.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. I was like, he wasn't commander, but he's some sort
Or
of chaplain.
at least they said he was a chaplain. I don't know if he
Right.
was actually, but yeah.
I don't think he was either. But you know, they used him as kind of her guiding force into that situation. And she, of course, ultimately does give her testimony. And then we get, of course, faithful Christian, as annoying as she is to everybody around her, says, I don't really believe everything that's going on. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, follow that intuition. And
Yep.
we get kind of this, I don't want to say interrogation, but they do ask her to come back and give a testimony. And they get her to crack a little bit and say some things around that. But while that's all happening, we also get to see her. You can tell she's very fascinated by Earth. She's always dreamed of going there.
Mm-hmm.
You see her looking out the window. She'll look out for a little bit, try to get her eyes adjusted to it a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. But
The actor who like taught her to do that, really love that actor. Like he's been in a couple things, like, but
mhm,
he really should be in more because he is just that small scene, but he did just such a phenomenal job. Like just a really small throwaway scene, but I really loved that actor for whatever reason. Thought it was a
yeah.
great scene. Like she's adjusting to Earth, perfect, like nice to run into like an Earther who cares. Like it was just a great moment.
Oh yeah, yep. At first I was like, I think I know what scene you're talking about. Now I definitely
Yeah,
do.
it
But
was like some sort of like almost looked like maybe like a homeless type setup where people were living on the streets or like some sort of like homeless market of some
yeah,
sort. But
and it was kind of funny too with that situation because it was kind of like and I can't think of an example, but kind of like an angel moment because it was one of those things
yeah,
she'll
yeah,
look down
yeah,
and then she
that
comes
was
on, he's
weird.
gone, and I was just
I
like,
didn't like that. That part was not great.
so was she real or was that her like her
I did
mind
not like
adjusting to
that.
the gravity? So that was a bit
Yeah,
odd. But
I didn't
did
like
you
that.
so to frame it in a question, did you anticipate her uh her stepping away from Mars to happen as quickly as it did, in the sense of her escaping, running away, wanting to side with Earth, because ultimately she does ask for asylum. But I certainly didn't, when her character was first introduced, I didn't necessarily think, oh yeah, she's going to be, she's going to switch to the Earth side. I more anticipated her to be an ongoing character on the Mars side. So I
hmm
was certainly surprised to see that character development of her slowly losing faith in what she believes Mars is and what they represent, and wanting to side with Earth, trying to get them to understand the gravity of what she saw. But yeah, did you anticipate anything about that? Did you think that was going to happen? Did you think she was ultimately going to go back? But kind of what was your thought process watching that?
Yeah, I figured she was on a journey of like um finding out what's behind her pledge of allegiance, because she kind of seemed like she was an indoctrinated person, like so many people are, saying this thing about the country that you belong to without any putting any real thought about the values behind it. So she was dedicated to the goal of Mars, of the future vision of Mars being terraformed, like just part of this Martian education that pumped out a Marine that was very good at what she did. And, she had this friend in the military in her squadron that was, I think, a former Earther and,
Correct. Yep.
had to deal with that. So that got kind of the ball rolling, seeing how people
Hmm.
treated people who had switched sides effectively, and how like
Yep.
are there no true Scotsmen in the house is kind of like what it all
Mm.
falls back to. You can keep tribalizing and tribalizing and tribalizing down to smaller and smaller tribes, and I think she starts to see that even within her ranks, the people that she goes to battle with, there's still people who don't see people who are willing to die as true Martians, as true
Mm.
patriots, whatever that might mean. And so the seeds are there. But I don't know, like the first time I saw it, I don't know if I really expected her to turn coat so quickly. Not turn coat, but to have this journey to try to figure out what she's fighting for so quickly. I thought, it would be this thing kind of like similar to what you said, where, okay, this will be great. We'll have somebody on the Martian side because then we'll know more about what Mars is like. And I kind of figured that's why she was introduced, to have a Martian character that we would follow separate from kind of everybody else.
Hmm.
So that was kind of my expectation. So it did. I mean, her journey and her, moment by moment, step by step realization of um, breaking out of her conditioning was, it made sense watching it pan out that way. But uh, yeah, I wasn't expecting it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I bring up that whole part because I did really enjoy her character development in regards to seeing all the conversations she had with leading up to that point. And I'm glad that you did bring up early, even before any of the gaslighting, or that we do get to see her interact with somebody who, like you said, wasn't born on Mars, was from Earth, was ridiculed to an extent by uh, the other people within the squad, but ultimately she had respect for him because he was fighting for Mars. And she's like,
Mhm.
I think she even said like he's just as Martian as the rest of us, kind of
Yep.
thing. So she
Hmm.
certainly she understood that. So yeah, really great part. And then was very very surprised to see her make the sprint across the line to get claim asylum, because again,
Yeah.
another moment like, oh, okay, it's like she's really gone over the
Hmm.
edge in regards to how she feels about Mars and her need to express what she saw. And
Yep.
she saw Christian as somebody that she could trust and talk about that, so she wanted to get
Hmm.
there as soon as possible. So we're left off with her there. And I know we're jumping around a bit, but following my notes along with as I was watching, we get to see them going along trying to find on Gan. They go to Ganymede with Prax to find his daughter and figure out what's going on. And we unfortunately find out that they were experimenting on kids, and that was a huge
Hmm.
belly drop moment for me, in terms of like I felt like just really sick and gross as soon as that was revealed, because I certainly felt the anticipation build to that, because it's like, oh gosh, we're gonna
Yeah.
find something. And we see the little girl in like I think it was basically like an ice chest or like whatever it was.
Yeah, the prop that they used for that was a weird choice for a prop, but
It
yeah,
it
whatever that
was
was. Yeah.
it was effective for me, in the sense of just seeing a, you know, a dead, I believe it was she was dead, but a dead kid
Hmm.
there. Not
I kind of hope so because I think they burnt the
They did
body.
burn
So
it, yeah, because it
hopefully,
had protomolecule in it, kind of thing. But
yeah.
yeah, it was just again one of those yeah, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just awful. Like thinking about what
Hmm.
Prax is dealing with in that moment. Um,
Well, and yeah, I think he's worried like right away. He's concerned that it was her.
right.
And like as a viewer, I remember thinking, oh, that is her. Cause it was like a little bit drawn out that moment there. And like, oh, he
Yep.
just found his dead daughter. This is like terrible. And so that's what I was expecting to pan out there too. And
Yep.
thankfully it wasn't, but still it was somebody's kid who was experimented on.
Right. And yeah, just that confirmation was unfortunate. Kind of saw that, but again, just just a tough thing for me to deal with, thinking about that again as a young dad. So
Mhm.
just a storyline I keep bringing up because again, it just was it was tough for sure. But we get them continuing to go along the line, and they do come across. Well, they do run into some of the scientists, I believe, as well in that moment. Um, I know there was like some main lady ultimately, but they get to
Yeah, that's right.
they get to this kind of final room where they hear something going on, or no, this is what happens now, I remember, so I apologize for kind of jumping around here. Is when they're in that room after they attack them, somebody throws a grenade. Do you
I
remember this
love
moment?
that. I love that
I
moment,
love it because
Amos.
it's such a like video game moment in the sense of
Yeah.
like, but it's totally something that would happen where they're just chilling and all of a sudden it was like grenade and Amos is just like, all right, picks it up,
Okay.
throws it back in, shuts the door, and you hear the explosion. I do remember laughing because I was like, this is
Yeah.
hilarious and that's great that he just like without thinking did that.
Yeah.
But of course the explosion happens, but then you hear a bunch of other
Stuff happen and you're like,
commotion
wait,
happening and you're
what?
like, what? So they go in, they find this cage has been broken out of, they see all these dead scientists, soldiers, and then they ultimately find the creepy lady who's of course dying and she can barely talk because her throat's been
Yeah.
punctured and they're trying to
And
talk
they,
to her and get her to talk and she's like, you'll never find out everything. Kind of
yeah.
classic I guess
Well, and it
tropiness
showed
to that.
that moment is showing, James Holden really slipping off the edge, like willing
Yeah.
to, and
Yep.
Naomi's watching it all go down there.
Right, he's really going
Really
after her in that moment.
not being at all the James Holden that we've seen previously. So
Yeah.
a really dark moment for him.
And I wrote this line down because it's probably my favorite line in the season. It's the last line of this episode was, they're in their suits because that's been punctured, whatever. So there's not any oxygen or anything like that. And I believe it was, what's the name of the main pilot on the Rossi?
Alex.
Alex is going around and you see very blurry off in the distance. You see a little figure move along the asteroid jumping around, and he goes, "Hey, what's that?" And I love it when you realize what it is. And James Holden, just with a pissed off look in his eye, says, "Let's go hunting."
It's like Lord of the Rings with the three hunters. Let's hunt some orc. Let's hunt some proto molecule monsters.
I just loved it because it was like B.A. Holden just being like you said, he's gone over the edge. He's
Yeah.
had enough of this proto molecule. He's kind of you know, the guy who feels like he has to be the hero in every situation. And he's like, we're going to go eradicate this thing. And he's like, we're going to go hunt this thing down and take it out. And that was the end of that episode.
I love
And I was
that. A
like,
great moment showing off his tunnel vision where very much
yep.
James Holden, just everything comes down to that.
Yeah. So I just had to say that line because I thought it was a great moment. And I was like, ooh, I like that. But so this ultimately leads them, of course, to chasing this proto molecule down. And what I have written down was and I believe it was the end of this next episode where we see this protocol as they're chasing down this proto molecule monster. We find out that it gets on the ship, and
Yep.
I think we get a hint of it right at the end of the episode. I remember because it was like a very last second where the ship's like going away, and they show like a side shot of the ship, and you see just like a little movement, and you're like, wait a
Yep.
second, what's about to go down? And we find out that the protomolecule or the monster that they're on is on the ship. And of course, we have to say, is this Prax's kid? Is this another kid?
Mhm.
Like, what? How do we deal with this situation? Like, we don't know what this thing is going to do. We don't
Mhm.
know like how to react to this thing. And of course, James is like, we just need to go kill this thing. Like he's still in that
Mhm.
mode, and Prax is like, I want to go talk to it. Can I go talk to it? And they're like, no, no, no. But what did you think when we find out it's on the ship? We find out that what did you think was? Did you think this was very similar to the protomolecule monster that we saw on Ganymede? Did you think that it was
Yeah,
Prax's
I
daughter?
thought
So
maybe it was the same one. I was worried that we got a switcheroo, that there's like, many of these, and that
mhm,
the one that we saw previously with Bobby was somebody else, and now maybe this is May who's back on the ship. So that was a very real concern, and obviously, as that is playing out, that's all Prax is thinking about: is this my daughter that's on the ship? I need to know before we do anything. So you
right,
have this really interesting situation where they one need to get take care of this because it's going to kill them if they don't, but they also have Prax who wants some peace of mind here, and yeah, really interesting situation to pan out. And it's happening at the same time as a bunch of other things are happening in that episode. So it's like you have that tension, you have the climax with that moment, and
right,
then you have what else? What's the other climax that's happening right there? Um, Bobby and Avasarala, that whole
yep,
situation on the ship. So that's happening at the same time, and then above
yeah,
Venus, you have the scientists there, that
Yep.
are trying to figure that
The
out. So you have three amazing climaxes of these different storylines throughout the show happening at the same time. And for me, my attention was definitely are we sure that's May? Like that was what I was
exactly.
primarily
Yeah.
concerned about.
And I believe, and I know James gets very hurt in that situation, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the way they get it off the ship is they use one of the nuclear
Yep.
warhead like centers or
As
cores to
bait.
attract it, because it
Hmm.
becomes very clear that it's attracted to the radiation from like the ship engine core, things like that. So they ultimately do get it off. And a very surprising moment as we get into like the very final part of this discussion with these last three areas is I was very surprised, and ultimately this kind of shifts things a little bit, was Aaron Wright admitting to Christian what he had done in terms of working with Mao.
Yeah.
And again, that's obviously changes a little bit shortly after in terms of his intentions. But when that happened, I remember thinking like, oh, again, another surprising moment. Like I did not expect him to willingly give up that information and be like, I messed up. And
Yeah.
you suspected me, but like I'm admitting to you because I need your help and I don't know what to do because it's obviously gotten out of my control.
It's such a tragic character in some ways where
Yeah.
he is making bold plays like any politician does, thinking that they can stay on top of any catastrophe that might happen as a result of their actions. And then you feel for a second, oh, maybe he's feeling guilty about all the lives
Yeah.
that he. It's like, okay, yeah, that seems reasonable. I feel like most people would feel guilty about that. So you forget for a second that he's this cold blooded politician. And yeah, so I was hopeful. I was like, okay, this is the villain. This has been the villain for the last two seasons. Now we see him, Mao and Savitar,
Hmm.
Aaron Wright being these two villains, and now we're gonna have at least one of them maybe working with the good guys here and trying to make things right, and we might have this kind of like anti-hero thing going forward with him where he's got all this responsibility that he needs to be
Hmm.
making up for. So I was really hopeful. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, cool, this is a
I
cool
thought it
thing
was
to be
just a cool,
happening.
yeah. For that short period of time, I was like, oh, that's a really cool like arc for him to ultimately
Hmm.
feel like he has a responsibility to admit to his wrongs and face the consequences. And of course, we find out shortly after that he's not that way. In the
Yeah.
sense as we get this moment where Mao and Christian meet up, or Mao asks Christian to meet up with him on his ship to have
Mhm.
a discussion around what's been going on with the protomolecule and things like that. And then when she's there, of course, what we're alluding to is we get the transmission from Aaron Wright, basically, framing Christian, saying that, I'm going to say that you were responsible for all of this. Oh,
Mhm.
by the way, I killed a Martian official to stop all of this. And I believe he was responsible for some of the Ganymede stuff, if I remember correct, in terms of one of the ships blowing up. I might be wrong in that, but I thought I remember going
Some of
back and
that
reading.
stuff, yeah, there's a lot of complex moving parts with that, and I'm
Right.
trying to, because I know, he was in association with Mao, and then after Eros, he kind of separated from Mao a bit, and so Mao went to the Martians, and then
Yeah.
um, Aaron Wright made his play to try to get the proto molecule through Mao back on Earth side, and there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm not exactly sure when what played out, especially with the Ganymede battle. But
Hmm.
clearly, yeah, he was definitely a main player here, but behind the events on Ganymede.
Yeah, and we quickly figure out that he's not there to help out Christian, and basically frames her, brings that to the president, shows him information that would allude to her basically putting everything that he did on her instead, to make
Hmm.
himself look good. So was a little again surprised by that again, because I was like, oh, we're getting this cool moment where he's switching, and then it's like, oh, never mind, he's actually a POS. So that's great. And
Yep.
then also blackmailing Mao a bit as well, being like, get back to work on this proto molecule thing. So was very, very surprised to see that. I assumed, and I believe at the end of the scene, Christian's still on the ship, but I'm like, okay, I think she's gonna get out of this ultimately. But a very tense moment with her, and then the officers as well, who are kind of confused as to what's going on as well. Um,
Hmm.
so one thing you alluded to, again, a super fascinating part as we get towards the very end here, was the Earth research ship that's going to Venus to try to figure out what's going on. We get this kind of fun banter and this friendship between the scientist and what appears to be like the pilot slash military guy that are going on this expedition to figure out what happened on this crash, harvest, see what's going on. And I really enjoyed those scenes that we got leading up to that, because I was very fascinated to see what would come out of that. And they have like these limited amount of probes that they have, and they figure out how to get down. But what were you thinking going into that moment of like, okay, well, they have this research ship, they're probably going to figure something out about the protomolecule or see something, but like, did you have any sort of anticipation or thoughts as to how that was going to play out in regards to them going in to see what was going on Venus in terms of how the crash was responding?
I assumed we'd be seeing a lot more of that scientist. Like into season 3, I thought, okay, that's going to be another one of the main characters. Is we're going to figure out through this guy. He's going to be maybe in the first half of season 3. He's going to be keeping tabs on what's happening on the surface. Figuring out better ways to send probes down, gathering that information, and kind of being the info dump in the way that I thought Cortazar was going to be. So I was like, okay, this is going to be our new Cortazar, like an inner who's like has a conscience and who hasn't had his empathy ripped out, and he's going to be the one who's going to. We're going to see the information about the protomolecule through his eyes, and I guess in a way we did at the end there, but definitely did not go the way I thought it would.
Yeah, I certainly thought we would see, or again, I haven't gotten into season 3 yet. I was kind of like, oh yeah, this is going to be probably a major character in terms of what's going on, in terms of his likability and things like that. And I know one of the other little side things that was happening is I believe a Martian ship was like following them essentially at the same
Yeah,
time.
they had. Yeah, they had two, both Earth and Mars had survey ships at
Right. But
Venus.
it was kind of like the Mars one was like matching their speed and not being aggressive, but like was kind of
Hmm.
like hinting at the fact that maybe they didn't want them to be there kind of
Yep.
thing. So I
Yeah,
thought that
it
was
was
an interesting
tense. There was
plot
a bit
point.
of tension there with
Kind of
everything
digs
else
into the more
happening.
that Mars is, further into this than maybe we think. So
Hmm.
uh to bring up to what you said, so we get to where they're going down to get a closer look. And one of the most bizarre things, which is weird to say with this show so far, is the protomolecule appears to rip apart the ship piece by piece, them included, them floating around. Not really sure if they're alive or not. Also, a funny note, I believe the other main guy that was in the ship was Adam Savage from
Yeah,
Mythbusters.
you're right. Yep.
I remember seeing him being like, that guy looks really familiar. And
Yep.
then I looked it up and it was totally him. I just thought it was funny
Yep.
because he just had a little cameo. But so he must be a big fan of the show. But yeah, so it rips apart the ship. Not really 100% sure of the intention behind that. And I believe it's, at least at the end of the show, it's still like that. Like it's literally like a completely ripped apart ship piece by piece.
Yeah,
Like,
broken down to its component parts.
correct.
And I think it leaves the humans intact, so
I
everybody
believe
on
so.
board,
Yeah.
and they'll have atmosphere for a little bit, and then as soon as gravity dissipates that, then obviously they'll die. But so for a second there, you see the scientists just looking in awe at everything.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a scientist, that's a good way to go. Like in the face of something that there's no way if you had another lifetime to study this, you're not going to understand what just happened. Like that's kind of like what I felt was going through his head, where he's like, okay, this is basically magic. This is a good way to go.
Yeah, and it's another moment of the protomolecule flexing its muscles a bit in terms of our understanding of what it's capable at in terms of controlling an entire asteroid and these humanoid versions of the protomolecule. And then we see it like maybe it's like learning information about the ship, maybe like it's doing it, like maybe there's a reason behind this ripping apart in terms of why that's
Yeah, well, the
happening.
way it
So
rips it apart does kind of look like it's almost like a blueprint diagram type thing
yeah,
happening there, where it's definitely wanting, it seems to understand how it's put together. So that makes
I
sense to
guess
me.
I guess I would say that would be a theory I would maybe have about it regards to what it's doing. But again, I don't know that yet. So I just thought it was a really cool scene in regards to that.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to touch on the expedition of that. So want to wrap up the conversation here. So the ending of this season and kind of the breaking apart of James and Naomi is we come back around to the protomolecule sample coming back into light, and we find out that Naomi has given the protomolecule sample to Fred Johnson and her plight to what she believes to be the best interest of the Belters is them having a sample of this so that they can do whatever it is they need to do to have a fair shot at this war between Earth and Mars. And of course, we know that they have the Cortazar, who was one of the main guys who worked on that with Dresden. So we know that'll play into that. But when Naomi ultimately did not destroy the sample, I didn't really know 100% what she was doing with it at the time. But did you have any sort of anticipation that she was gonna like give it away or give it to Fred Johnson
No.
specifically?
I mean, I thought it made sense for her to just leave it there, but the way she explains it when she's like, I don't know if there's like, I don't know if we're going to survive this on the Rocinante. And so having it just in her brain, um, which is what I was thinking, that she would just leave it there. And then, if, if she dies, whatever, people will forget about it and hopefully never find it. But definitely it made sense that she would give it to Fred Johnson, but it wasn't on my scope that that would be the decision
Yeah.
she would make to do with it. I thought maybe the Rocinante would just keep it themselves as like a bargaining chip down the road, but I had no idea that's what would happen.
Yeah. You're certainly correct. It makes sense for her character to do that. And I was very surprised to see that. So I'm very excited to see where that leads in terms of the Belters' ability to have a chance in this war, because I don't really know 100% what that means or how the protomolecule helps them in terms of having a sample.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I guess Naomi might have some understanding of its possibility, but I guess Fred Johnson obviously saw that as well. But I don't. It's one of those things where you're like, I don't know if they really understand like what they got their hands on right now, and
Yeah.
maybe having Cortazar will help. But
Well, and
I'm very fascinated to see. Yeah, go ahead.
if nothing else, they know what it can do to like a station. So it's like it's a
Yeah.
bargaining chip. It's like we'll launch this at Earth if we don't get food, water, and air. They can use it that way. Even if they don't do it as research, it's still a weapon by
And I
itself.
guess they have those nukes as well.
Yep. Yeah.
So they're building up a little bit of some weapons. So my biggest intrigue going into season 3 is how the Belters are going to be able to use the protomolecule in any sort of way to give them whether it's a bargaining chip or some sort of power to protect themselves, not be caught in the middle like they have in the past with these wars. That's at least that's how they describe it in the show. Is the
Hmm.
Belters are usually the first to lose in that situation because they're kind of stuck in the middle, and they're the ones that suffer when war happens in regards to, I'm assuming, their standard of living and their way that their life has gone about. So that's my biggest intrigue going into season 3. But do you have, I guess my question to you is, as I get into season 3, like, I mean, are things going to get crazier, even crazier than what I'm doing? It's like, I know you can't give me any spoilers and I don't want you to, but like, am I in for just like more of a roller coaster as I get into 3?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. Things will happen that you won't see happening, but in hindsight, you'll be like, oh shit, fuck. Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
man, awesome. But yeah, I say all of that to say I really like the season. I'm really loving the show. I'm glad you recommended it to me because
I'm happy to hear that.
it's crazy in terms of just every plot point. Like I said, there's probably 3 or 4 events, and I've said this several times, that happened throughout the show where I'm like, this simple plot line could have been the entire show
Hmm.
had they not, followed up with more. So that's what I love about it. So any final thoughts, Josh, on season 2 before we wrap this
Yeah.
very, very
So
long conversation up?
absolutely. Season 2 is very, very good. When I say it's in my bottom half of the seasons, that only speaks to the excellence of the other seasons. And season
Mhm.
3, believe it or not, probably is tied with season 2 for me.
Okay.
So the best is very much yet to come. I love a lot about season 3, and I'm super excited to talk to you about that when we get to that.
Awesome. Well, For anybody still watching, and if you are, thank you so much, because this was a very long conversation about this. So let us know what you thought down below on anything we've talked about, what you think of this season, if you're enjoying these things. So please check out Josh's channel. It is Quest for Comics, now formerly Questler Comics. So if there's any confusion there on the naming of this episode and why it's slightly different and seeing Josh's face, go check it out if you have any interest in comic books and comic book collecting. Give it a subscribe and give it a couple watches in terms of his videos. So would highly recommend that. You'll see a couple videos of me over there talking about some of the Disney Plus shows. So give those a watch as well. So
I also have to plug Distraction Quest, which is
oh,
where we'll be talking. Aaron and I will be talking about probably quite a few Marvel movies down the road. So check that out
yeah,
as well.
yep, definitely give that one a listen as well. And a subscribe if you are interested in seeing more conversations. So we will be back, as Josh said, with season 3. Hope to get at it much sooner than I did between season 1 and season 2. Took a little longer, but that's okay. So again, if you're still watching, thank you so much. And please subscribe and like it if you liked this. Thanks again.